It has its next session. The big stumbling block in negotiations is funding the president's border wall, with the president demanding $5 billion to fund it. While Democrats continue to say no, Nancy Pelosi says it's immoral. This morning, President Trump taking to Twitter to write this: the only way to stop drugs, gangs, human trafficking, criminal elements, and much else from coming into our country is with a wall or a barrier. Drones and all of the rest are wonderful and lots of fun, but it is only a good old-fashioned wall that works. President Trump had a lunch meeting with conservative lawmakers yesterday about border security, and one of those lawmakers in attendance is my first guest this morning. He told the president he would have his back if it came to this. North Carolina Congressman Mark Meadows is with us. Joining us for an exclusive interview this morning is a member of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee and the chairman of the House Freedom Caucus. Mr. Chairman, it's good to have you on the program this morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Maria, great to be with you. Thanks so much.
First, give us a status check. Where are we in terms of these negotiations, Congressman? What are the sticking points now?
Well, I think the sticking point is really that Nancy Pelosi is driving most of this negotiation. You would think it would be Chuck Schumer, but I can tell you, based on conversations I've had as recent as this morning, it seems like Nancy Pelosi is actually the leader, the minority leader in the Senate. And so they've come at an impasse. This is all about trying to make sure that Donald Trump does not secure the border. And it's really more out of their dislike for this president than really about the communities that they are really should be upholding to make sure that they're safe.
Well, I think this is a really important point that you're making, because this is supposed to be about border security. And the Democrats always say we are for border securities, and yet we haven't seen any votes yes on ending sanctuary cities, on voting for Kate's Law, on the border wall. So I mean, there's the only other one thing you could think about what this means, and they just don't want the president to fulfill another campaign promise.
Well, you're exactly right, Maria. And I think the other part of that is every single Democrat will come on and say that they're for border security. They are, except for one problem. Their vote does not match their rhetoric. And so, we're looking for compromise. I can tell you I was with the president and his team yesterday. I saw Mick Mulvaney earlier this morning. They're looking for ways to make sure that we can get this done. Hopefully we will. But I can tell you it seems like the Democrats have dug in and are trying to make sure that this shutdown lasts a lot longer than it should.
Well, I mean, you're looking at next week when the Senate resumes on the 27th, but what if it does? How are you going to get them to agree on the 27th to come up with the money for the border wall? I mean, what happens if this goes into January? Don't you have a worse off situation once the Democrats take the majority in the new Congress?
Well, without a doubt, when the Democrats are in control of the House, certainly the 217 Republicans that voted with the president just a few days ago will be in the minority. But I think, it's all about having options. We spend billions of dollars. Maria, maybe this is a solution. We spend billions of dollars every year in improper payments. So maybe Senator Schumer would go with me and say anything that we recover that we can spend on the wall. That's one option that he wouldn't even have to appropriate. There are a number of options that wouldn't cost the American taxpayer money and yet would secure our border. I think cooler heads need to prevail. Well,
what are you negotiating at now in terms of numbers? The president said $5 billion. Is he willing to accept under $3 billion? What's the neighborhood that's being discussed right now?
Well, obviously, it's anywhere from $1.6 billion to $5 billion. I can tell you that there are a number of conservatives who believe that the $5 billion was already a concession. When you look at $25 billion to build a wall, we're already, the president's already come down to $5 billion. But, yeah, there's room in there. There were conversations. Senator Graham, I was with him last night. He was talking to some of his Democrat colleagues trying to find a compromise. But really what we've found is we've found a wall. It's on the Democrat side because they're not willing to do anything, and yet it's just not a position that's defensible.
Well, what about the language being used? I mean, Nancy Pelosi said a wall is immoral. Chuck Schumer said you're not going to get a wall next week, next month, next year. You're not going to get a wall. So now the language is changing to what? Steel slats? I mean, they don't want to call it what you're actually coming up with money for?
Well, the president heard that loud and clear. He actually rolled out a different type of barrier, a steel slat barrier, or we call them SSBs. But yet, you know, you've got Nancy Pelosi, you've got Senator Schumer and others who voted for 700 miles of fencing. If they want to go ahead and appropriate the money for the other 350 miles that they didn't build on that 2006 legislation that they passed, we'll help them with that. You know, this is not about what we call it. This is about what it is. And we need border security. The Democrats don't want it, and most Americans do.
But why would they not want it, Congressman? I mean, it sounds like crazy to hear you say they don't want border security. They say they do want border security. Why would they not want border security?
Well, I think what it is, it's all about one campaign promise. They know that this was a central theme for this president, and quite frankly, it was what ultimately made the day and why Democrats came over, unaffiliated came over, and voted for this president. They know that that was the central theme for part of his campaign, and they just don't want him to fulfill it. When we look at that, yes, they do say they're for border security, but they're for everything that doesn't matter. When it really gets to sanctuary cities or Kate's Law or a barrier or asylum reform, they're absolute no each and every time, and you can look at the voting record and verify that.
But I just find it really extraordinary that just last week you all passed a farm bill which cost $850 billion plus. And so they found the money for the farm bill, which I guess had some welfare in it as well, the $860 billion, but they can't come up with $5 billion for border security.
Well, Maria, you're exactly right. We have $5 billion in sugar subsidies in that very farm bill that they just put forth. But we're not talking about money. We're talking less than 1/2 of 1 penny in terms of what we're talking about in terms of money. The president has agreed with them on over $1 trillion of spending, and we're debating $5 billion.
Yeah.
It's just not a defensible position for the Democrats.
You're going to dig in. What does this mean for 2020? Congressman, because the longer this goes on, the longer the government stays closed, the longer people call it the Trump shutdown, which is what Chuck Schumer came up with. Is this going to impact 2020 re-election for President Trump?
Well, it'll impact President Trump if he doesn't keep his campaign promises. I can tell you this, that when we're looking at this, we're there at the White House yesterday. The president was trying to make sure that it had minimal impact on federal employees, minimal impact on the American people, and say, how can we manage this in such a way that we stay firm and resolved, but that it doesn't have the negative implications. And actually, you're already starting to see this. You'll get all kinds of narratives out there, but this president is committed to making sure that that American citizens are first in his mind, and he keeps his campaign promise.
Real quick before you go, I've got to ask you the status of your investigation into the FBI and the DOJ. We know that once your colleagues get in there in the majority next year, these investigations are dead. Are we going to see any accountability for what took place during the 2016 election, where a couple of people from the FBI and the DOJ tried to stop Donald Trump in any ways that they could have?
Well, you've got John Ratcliffe coming on later. He's been very, very good on this particular issue. You've been very good on this issue. I can tell you that we're going to continue to do that. The Democrats are going to do away with any official hearings, but that doesn't stop members of Congress from conducting oversight. We'll continue to do that and make sure that people are held accountable. Quite frankly, there's so much there that the American people need transparency, and I think when that happens, it'll be good medicine for everybody.
Well, you've got the president's ear. Would you encourage the president to declassify those documents so the American people understand what took place?
I have, and I will, and you know, listen, the president's typical default is on transparency. He believes that we ought to let the American people see it because he knows what he's done and what he hadn't done, and I do think that we will see declassified documents in the weeks and months to come. All
right, we will talk more about that with Congressman John Ratcliffe coming up, who's on the Judiciary Committee. Sir, it's good to see you this morning. We'll be watching the developments. Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Maria.
Let's bring in Kansas Congressman Roger Marshall. Thanks so much for being here.
Merry Christmas, Molly.
Merry Christmas to you. Wonderful to have you here in the green tie and the red dress. We're fully festive.
Christmas spirit.
Exactly. So things have been kind of crazy up on Capitol Hill. We've got the partial government shutdown underway now. When do you see an end in sight? We're hearing at least until after the holidays. And potentially, could this be a very long shutdown if somebody doesn't budge on one side or the other? Where's the compromise going to come from?
Well, Molly, I'm predicting that nothing happens till January 3rd when Nancy Pelosi gets sworn as Speaker of the House. I think that she cannot do anything with this wall issue until she gets all the votes of the new liberal socialists that are in her party.
So you're saying the Democrats are definitely going to push this off until Nancy Pelosi can assume power, and then they'll have more control. So what happens next week then? What do you do in the meantime? Keep passing paperwork back and forth and maybe a few speeches on the floor? Or?
I think it'll be very, very quiet up here. I think that the Speaker has basically told us all we should go home, be with our families. We've been asked to come back within 24 hours. I think the House has done our side. We put a halt to the President considering signing this the Senate bill they were going to send us without any funding for the wall. So we've done our job. The ball is now in the court of the Senate. We need them to do their job and negotiate faithfully with the President.
Once Nancy Pelosi does step into power, if that comes to pass, as people expect it to, do the Democrats then take ownership of this? Is it dangerous in an extent how long it goes on from there for the Democrats? Where's the winner and the loser once things pass into January?
Well, I think the Democrats have to take responsibility right now because they could solve this problem and negotiate in good faith, and all the more so with Nancy Pelosi in control of the House as well.
See if anyone's willing to come to that compromise. The off-ramp looks like a different place to get to. Let's talk a little bit about the big development today in that Patrick Shanahan will be stepping in to fill the shoes for Mattis as acting secretary. What do you think of the choice, and what do you think about Mattis's early departure?
Well, I think anybody that's from the business world knows that President Trump is doing exactly what we would do in the business world. We would never accept a letter of resignation from a senior person and then let them stay on board for a month or two. Can you imagine Secretary Mattis going to NATO and representing the president? He's truly a lame duck right now. Very sad that he's going. He's been a great, great leader, well-respected voice. But I think the American public needs to realize that every day for 30 years, General, now Secretary Mattis, has woke up and said, how do we destroy ISIS? I think President Trump wakes up every morning and says, have we defeated ISIS and how we get our troops home? So I'm excited about a commander-in-chief that's going to push us in that direction.
In the wake of Secretary Mattis leaving, as you point out, he's gotten a lot of bipartisanship praise from both sides of the political aisle. Does Patrick Shanahan have a tough shoes to fill in those coming weeks or months, or however long it takes to bring in whoever the eventual secretary will be?
You know, absolutely. You know, another lesson from the private world, one of my mentors, an orthopedic surgeon, once told me that none of us are inexpendable, though. And not to be too hung up on a person, a senior person leaving, that we'll find someone else better to replace them. Secretary Mattis, a great job, but I think we need someone that's going to support the president's agenda of getting troops home. Look, we've dominated ISIS. We've destroyed ISIS. The military's done their job. Maybe it's time for a new plan. Let's get those soldiers home, get them protected. We can still protect the Middle East with our soldiers in Iraq.
Who do you think the new face should be? There are quite a few, a long list of names that have been floated out there from, former Senator from New Hampshire, Kelly Ayotte, Senator Lindsey Graham, Senator Cotton, David Petraeus, for instance. What are your thoughts on who should be the next secretary?
Well, certainly I'm real impressed with Senator Lindsey Graham and his ability to stand up and speak, agree with the president when he agrees with him, speaks and disagrees with him when he needs to disagree with him. I think he'd be a great person. Beyond that, I'm not real familiar with some of the other people spoken about.
Shifting gears to Syria, that was considered a controversial move when the president decided to pull troops out of Syria. And one of the strongest criticisms was that we were potentially leaving allies, specifically the Kurds, in a lurch, that it would be dangerous for them and we were leaving our allies. Your thoughts on the president's decision to pull out of Syria now and what it means for those allies?
Well, again, I'm glad the president is considering first and foremost, how do we get our men and women home and into safety? If the president would ask me, I would ask him to consider moving those 2,000 soldiers over to Iraq, and we can still support the Kurds very easily from Iraq. I think that what we can do now with drones, with satellite technology is incredible. Twice in the last 4 months, our troops in Syria almost got overran by the enemy in the middle of sandstorms. I don't want to wake up one morning and see on Fox News, my gosh, we lost 200, 300 soldiers last night. So let's bring them back together. What we need are quick strike forces able to go anywhere in the world. Battling ISIS is like battling the whack-a-mole game in the carnivals. So that's what we need, are quick strike forces.
All right, Congressman Roger Marshall, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
And thank you for matching up with me today. That was great.
My pleasure. Merry
Merry
Christmas.
Christmas to you as well.
We just gave away something that I don't care that you could have given away as a compromise later in Congress.
Right. You're telling me you couldn't get a bump stock ban through Congress with Democrats?
Of course you could.
Of course you could have.
Of course you could.
Why would we force this through? And again, I think it's completely unconstitutional.
I do too.
First of all, we should set the baseline there. It's unconstitutional to do this. This is obviously an infringement on your ability to bear arms. Obviously. It is. Fundamentally, it is unconstitutional. It's tied to another law that is unconstitutional, which is these 3 different statutes that come out against machine guns and automatic weapons, which I completely think are unconstitutional as well. So, but even if you go beyond that, let's just say we live in this world, we're in a progressive world where we don't necessarily follow the Constitution all that closely, and we do the things that just have to be done, and that's the world we live in. Even if you're in that world, you gotta pass a law. You gotta pass a law. You can't have the president just making up distinctions on, well, we don't like that thing. Again, in the legal statute of what a machine gun is the very clear language that a bump stock is not included. Very specifically, it says any weapon which shoots, is designed to shoot, or can be readily restored to shoot automatically more than one shot without manual reloading by a single function of the trigger.
So in other words, you pull the trigger back
once
and you hold it.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what a bump stock is.
It isn't. And if you think, well, but I think that's similar to a bump stock, that's great. Then pass a law against a bump stock if you don't like them. I'll still argue that it's unconstitutional, but at least it makes some sense.
So, and here's the reason why. I said this to the Democrats and they didn't listen. Don't go down this path, Democrats, because someday Barack Obama is going to be gone. And you're going to so disenfranchise people and make people angry and set this precedent that someone else that you really don't like is going to use those same things against you.
Yeah.
We now have Donald Trump. Now, please don't set this precedent. You can't have the precedent of a president just saying, you know what, and something else I want to ban. You can't do it.
Right. The next Democrat president who wants to ban, whether it's magazines at a certain capacity, anything they want to pick apart from your ability to bear arms, they will cite this bump stock ban and say, look, the president, a Republican president,
did
that. Of course I can do it. He didn't say anything.
And we didn't say anything because I don't want to defend bump stocks.
Yeah.
I don't care about bump stocks. I don't know anybody who does care about bump stocks. But it's those battles that you don't care about that become the most important.
Yeah, go back. I mean, there was a battle in the Supreme Court that, this is very relatively recent history about marijuana, in which they basically fought the Commerce Clause when it came to marijuana, and it was a case in the 2000s that because it was marijuana, I don't think any conservative was like into thinking about it, and it was not a big issue on talk radio at the time or anything. But that was like probably one of the best opportunities to reverse the ridiculous nonsense the government has used with the Commerce Clause over a very long period of time to restrict the way or to get their tentacles into business.
And you know what? The Commerce Clause is a really good example of that itself. Yeah. I don't remember the farmer's name, but the court case that happened under FDR, nobody paid attention to. Nobody cared because it just involved a farmer and his wheat and I don't grow wheat and I don't care. But that's why Washington is in all of our businesses, because of that one move that no one cared.
Willard, I'm right around it.
It's Fillmore versus Whitburn.
We're right in there. Willard versus Fickburn.
Okay, close.
There we go. We had all of the syllables, just all in the wrong order.
All in the wrong order. Okay, so that was the Attorney General against against a farmer. It's Attorney General. And because of that, the guy who grew his wheat on his farm, he never sold it. It was just for him and his family and his livestock. It never went anywhere. They said, well, it could, and more importantly, you are going to be feeding your family and your livestock with wheat not purchased. So that wheat that you would have purchased if you weren't a wheat farmer, that might affect the price of wheat coming into your state or leaving your state. So we have a right to regulate your land. Oh, my gosh. And people didn't say anything. And that's how we lost our freedom. And the same can be said, first of all, the bump stock thing. Also yesterday, can you imagine? Well, you don't have to. Imagine when President Obama just said, you know what? We're leaving Iraq. And he became General Obama? And how upset we all were? Wait, hold it just a second. No.